even figure out what like their filler word is. Like some of them, they just go straight to the word good. Like it doesn't matter if it was actually really terrible. It's just they're always saying good when they lose things to say. So then figuring out how can we go away from using that to using something else, and how can we make it more productive overall over time.
When you say going away from using good, are you talking about in the context of like the recording itself, or their evaluation of it?
The recording itself. Like you'll find that like every other sentence out of their mouth is the word good, and you're like, you really don't need to be using this all the time. I doubt it was that good all the time. And it usually results, what I found is that they use that filler word because they're a little bit afraid to actually critique the crew and tell the crew what needs to happen in that moment.
Allison, what are you using to get recordings?
So last year we actually purchased a Cox Orb, and that's been my saving grace because the audio on that is amazing. It's way better than any recorder.
So I'm a huge fan. I also got a Cox Orb this past year, and the biggest problem I have is I have one, so I have to remember to tell which coxswain I want to take it out. And sometimes I'll tell them and they'll be like, oh, I didn't take it out. But does anybody else have a Cox Orb?
I've used them. They're fantastic. Anybody who's looking to switch from NK, I highly recommend them.
I would highly recommend them.
Me too. We only have one. So it's just like you, Becky, I have to like remember to be like they go to grab it if they're used to it. I'm like, nope, not you today. It's you today.
We have two. One is sort of designated men and designated women, but it doesn't have to be that way. Like if the men were doing a practice, they could take both, or the women, like a particular, if you wanted to do seat racing or something. So we do have the ability to use two. We also purchased the ones that give a GPS map, and I love that. Like, talk about steering. If you ever could get a video from the stern of the boat to watch the boat move and then show on a GPS map how they wiggle.
I would love that one. It
is amazing. Like, I've gotten more out of that, like as much out of that as the audio. So I'm a huge fan. Sorry, NK, if anyone's a rep. I love my Blue Ocean. I'll never trade that away, but the Cox Orb is good.
Yeah, I agree.
On that, sort of off that, if you're going to give your coxswains to record a practice, will it be just sort of like, will you have, like if you're doing just some steady state at whatever length, will you get a recording from that sometimes, or do you want to just mix it up?
I'll use it. I'll do practice recording and race recording. And I actually set up a Dropbox this year, which I hadn't done before because we have the Cox Orb now. So it makes it really simple. And in our Dropbox, it's like, I have it broken up into practice day recordings and race day recordings. And then I'll put the coxswain's name and then the date of it, or if it's a race, what race it was, for them to be able to go back and also to listen to each other. And just get them a little bit more comfortable with listening to each other's audio on top of listening to their own. And they all said, I got really positive feedback from that this fall. So I was really excited to continue that this spring. But next year we'll dive into that.
That's
more.
a good idea.
But you can also, just using a normal recorder, you could also upload it to your computer and do the same thing with Dropbox. Mm-hmm. Just never thought to before.
I've had people use their iPhones and just like, we have the boathouse jackets with the kangaroo pouch. It's like, put it in there and make sure you zip it so it doesn't fall out when you get out of the boat, as has happened.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think recordings are like one of your biggest helpers in developing them and getting them to see their progression. It's the quickest way to, just because, yes, your crews may stay consistent like throughout the whole year, but from year to year, you'll have different people, or even you do a lot of sea racing in a year and then you're not sure. if you're actually helping a boat or not. But I think that's an easy way to get that self-evaluation back. One of the worksheets that I use with them that I find to be the most helpful is it's 3 columns. One column says see, one column says hear, and the other one says feel. And then that's all at the top. And then down the side, I have for the entry, the stretch position, which is arms and body, half slide, 3/4 slide, and then bow or the release. And that's for them to be able to jot down what they're seeing at each of those positions, what they hear at each of those positions, and what they're feeling. And then that makes them a little bit more aware of what's going on in the boat by making them use all of their senses a little bit more, which then at the end of the day also develops them in having a larger vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
And I've also noticed that then it not only helps with having a larger vocabulary, but it also helps them in return help the athletes more by giving more specific feedback to them. So then at the end of the day, you're getting a 2-fold return, because then your athletes are actually getting better technically as well.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The other thing that I think is really great is like if you can have your coxswains take rowing strokes, like that helps them so much just by actually understanding what it feels like. I know that being a rower first and then transitioning to coxing, that was a game changer for me. And I know our coxswains that I've had sit on like the erg, if we can't get them into a boat and they've never erged a day in their life, they all of a sudden are like, whoa, this is what the athletes are feeling every stroke. And it's, yeah. And that even lets them understand more so like what muscle groups are being used and where athletes should be feeling things in the stroke. So yet again, that helps with that 2-fold concept as well.
Mm-hmm.
So those are some of the things that I have found to be the most helpful in helping them develop over time. And I feel like I'm constantly learning new things from them about what helps them most with everything. So I'm sure next fall I'll have a few new things that I didn't know before.
Yeah. I want to ask sort of 2 separate. I'll ask one question now. Coxswain selection.
Yeah.
That to me has always sort of been a very holistic process. What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's different ways you can do it. I feel like you can do it with, either seat racing, or you can do it with athlete feedback, a mixture of both, or just based on your own gut and intuition. Like this past year, we were not going to take athlete feedback or anything. We were just going to go with our gut with who was going to be in each boat, just based off of consistency from them every day. But our athletes also know that we have like a set of expectations that go to everybody, so that if they don't play into those expectations, then they know they're never going to be in that top boat. So that's usually where we start first, is with our expectations. Do they meet all of them? Yes. Okay. Now what's the right next step? If our coxswains were closer, what we probably would have done was we probably would have asked a little bit of athlete feedback and saying, like, do you think, like, if tomorrow you're racing at the league championship, who would you want in the boat with you, kind of thing.
Okay.
And we haven't really taken, we don't really have the coxswain weight too much into account, because until this year, all our other years, our coxswains were pretty much the same weight. There wasn't one that was much more heavy than the next. So it kind of was like who is making the boat go the fastest right now. I could see maybe next year it playing role in it, because will have one coxswain that is significantly heavier than the rest, but that's a little bit of also a tricky situation because that coxswain also has like some other mental health issues, so we'll have to figure out how to navigate that one all around. But I know that I think to Steve, who's my boss, I think weight's a little bit more important to him than it is to some other people. I do have that list of expectations and I can share that with everybody. I'll type it up and I can send it to John to send out to everybody.
I guess the second question is a lot more of a practical question.
Okay.
I'm starting this rowing club here in State College and we plan on racing coxed boats. So we're going from zero sort of rowing knowledge or culture at all to putting high school girls in coxswain seats. What do you think I should know? Very broad question, I know.
Yeah.
But
I think number one is you're going to have to be patient. Like, your patience is going to have to be out of this world. Like, they're going to really annoy you and really upset you probably a lot. So you just got to remember that they're learning and that you're just going to have to like kind of help them slowly but surely, and that like when they mess up and the boat is all of a sudden going the wrong direction, then you want it to be like, oh, okay, kind of like just stopping them and saying like, okay, why did we do this? Just to try to understand from their perspective how they're figuring things out. I think the more as they're learning and as you're seeing them make mistakes, kind of just stopping, even though it might slow down your practice and take away from the athletes a little bit, you want to give them that attention in that moment and just say like, okay, why did we do that? And then that also gives you the feedback of knowing, did I explain clearly to them what I want them to do right now? Or was I really off and I need to readjust how I explain things to them? Does that all make sense, John?
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. That's great.
And then as far as steering goes, you just really want to remind them that like little adjustments always, because if you make a big adjustment, A, the rowers are going to feel it, but B, you're going to end up probably going not a direction you want to go.
You're going to end up going like too far one way.
Yeah. The boat takes a little bit of time to respond definitely to that rudder. It's usually about 3 strokes before you start seeing it do what you want to do. So if it's not, after those like 3 strokes, it's not doing what you want to do, then you know you need to adjust a little bit more.
Yeah, sounds good.
I think there was another question here. I think that I'll do both with in regards to getting feedback from the athletes. Sometimes I'll do one-on-one, and that's only if I think the crew really will influence each other. Like if you're kind of like talking to them all together and you know that you have a few people in there that are like, that everybody else will just agree with them because they don't want to start any grumblances of any sort, then I'll go to one-on-one. But if I think everybody in the boat is pretty level-headed with going with their own opinion, then I'd go with the approach of asking the whole crew.
Allison, with your coxswains, how many coxswains in your program come in with experience versus teaching brand new coxswains?
Yeah. So this past year, we had all experienced coxswains come in. We had no new coxswains, but my first year here, we had 2. And next year, depending on what our novices look like, we probably will have all experienced coxswains again. So it varies from year to year, but even with those experienced coxswains coming in, some of them act very novice-like. So even though they have experience, you're not really sure exactly what was going on there.
And then even like with having experienced coxswains, how about like just talking a little bit about, you've got a freshman coxswain sitting in front of your like senior stroke seat, and like that would be the same kind of case for a beginner coxswain in a novice boat, but how do you help that athlete transition to becoming more confident and really then becoming better at that role?
Yeah, I would say I am usually just like brutally honest with them that it's going to feel uncomfortable and it's probably going to be like terrifying when they first hop in the seat, because I think the more you can just be honest and upfront with how they might feel, you can be like, I could be totally wrong, but when I was in your shoes at one point in time, like I was terrified, and that it's totally valid if that's the way you feel. And that just take it moment by moment. And it's going to be a little bit of a slow getting going as you get used to the way things are done here. But once you figure it all out, you're going to pick it right up. It's kind of like riding a bike where it's going to feel a little bit unstable. But then once you get that momentum going, you're going to be totally fine. So that's usually how I try to approach it with them. And then just remembering to be patient, because sometimes it's easy when you throw them into one of your varsity boats and that they're not doing the same thing as your senior coxswain. You're like, why aren't you doing that? And you want to get like really angry at them, but then you have to like bring yourself back down to reality of where they are and just say, okay, let's figure out why they aren't doing what I need them to do right now. Does that answer your question, Becky?
I have a question, because I'm actually kind of coming back into the sport after 6 years away. That time was spent a lot at the Marine Corps. And I find that when I was in the Marine Corps, I thought that there was a parallel in everything I did to the rowing world. And now that I'm plugging back into the rowing world, everything seems to have a Marine Corps parallel. How this applies here is when you have a young Marine and you hand him a radio for the first time, and you say, okay, your buddy has a compound fracture of the leg. You need to call a CASEVAC and get him help. One of two things is going to happen. Either he's going to have the list of things he's supposed to say next to him, and he's going to start yelling and screaming into the radio. And it's just going to confuse anybody that's on the other end. Or he's going to hit the transmit button and just go, And I remember I used to coach freshman high school kids and teaching coxswains, and the exact same thing would happen. How do you get past that point, those moments with your coxswains?
Yeah. So in the moment where they say absolutely nothing, I usually try to go into the mode of, I just want you to speak, like just talk to them, because the more you can just kind of get them talking, the easier it's going to be for them to just kind of like roll with the punches and just talk more. And it's going to be easier to kind of like refine it over time. So usually they're like, but I don't know what to say. I'm not saying, I don't want to talk because I don't want to sound stupid. I'm like, you know what? Just pretend they're all your friends. So like, just pretend that whatever you say, they're going to love, whether they love it or not. Just pretend that they will. And usually when I bring up that it's their friends, they're like, oh, okay. Or even I'll try to be like, just pretend you're having a conversation with your best friend, but your conversation's about rowing. And maybe it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be perfect at first, but we're going to figure this out together. That way they know they have you as a support system, but they also know it's kind of like that reminder that everybody is there for them and that they're all learning together. With the approach that they just say the wrong thing completely, I usually will, I'll usually just stop. I'll usually stop the crew and I'll say to the coxswain, I'll just say like, hey, like, how are you explaining for them to do X, Y, and Z? I think something's getting lost in translation. And then I'll wait as long as it takes for them to respond back to me, which yet again requires patience, lots of it, because you just want to give them the answer. I'll wait for them to give that to me, and then I will talk to them about, okay, when you say this is what's happening. This is what they're doing. Let's try saying it in this fashion instead and see what happens. I think the more you can do things in the moment, the more they're going to learn because it's fresh in their minds. And the more that then when you watch them say something, you watch the crew do something really, really well, being like to your coxswain, like, I don't know what phrase you just said, but whatever you said just had this really positive effect on the boat. And the more you can kind of give them that reinforcement, the more confidence they're going to get. And then the more they're going to realize how they can start to shift some of their other vocabulary. Does that help at all, Connor?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, some of the stuff we used to have, like, you know, if you want to get a given thing, like if you want to tell somebody where you are, there's a specific reporting format that you would say over the radio to tell people where you are so that it's standard, right? If somebody's back in headquarters with, they would have like laminated report forms that they could write on with dry erase markers and stuff like that. Do you use things like that? I mean, obviously an experienced coxswain isn't going to need that kind of crutch, but do you have like a basic set of, if you want to do this, here's how you do it, like cards, or we even used to use like quarterbacks wrist sleeves and stuff like that with different reporting formats on it. Do you have any of those kinds of things?
Really the only thing I have is, like I was saying, like I have that thing where I have like a list of all the basic drills that we'll do all the time, and the stationary drills. Otherwise, not really. When it's if it's like a novice coxswain who's never even seen the sport of rowing, knows anything about it, then usually I'll type up something like quick, where I'll give them like a basic kind of outline of what things are. But a lot of it I just do by trial and error, and I try to have them write down a lot of their own notes. I feel like the more they can write things down for themselves, the more they retain and remember it.
Allison, you mind I tag in on that one, actually?
Sorry, say it again?
Mind if I tag in on that one real quick?
Go for it.
I've played around with doing that and giving that new novice coxswains like really clear index cards. And I've actually found it tends to hinder their growth a little bit because for one, they're just not internalizing it. They're not coming up with on their own, the wrong way to phrase that. But the way I kind of look at it,
does it bring their attention down into the coxswain's compartment?
Yeah,
instead of eyes open, head up.
Yeah, it stops being. It doesn't go to becoming automatic for them. It's just they always rely on that, and even when you take it away, you took away their training wheels. Now they have to completely relearn how to do everything on their own again. So I find when I'm teaching my novices that you should be, I think Allison said it this whole time, is you need to be coaching them just as much as you're coaching your regular athletes. And as coxswains, they should be listening to you. I really expressed to my athletes is like, listen to what the calls that I make and emulate them, learn what I'm saying, how I say it, and things like that. And they'll learn how to make the calls on their own from there versus having to rely on the sheet in front of them and constantly having to read something before making the call. I always want my coxswains to just make a decision. Be wrong about the decision. I'll correct it afterwards, but make a decision and be confident in the decision. Building up that confidence is so crucial to novice coxswains.
I think that actually goes back to something Sean said in one of the second webinar or talk we did, is like what he said about coaching. In coaching, you're always, in the moment, you're always right. You may later come to find out that you were mistaken, but in the moment, you were right. So.
Yeah, I think what you're saying, like I can definitely see how that like breaks down the coxswain's ability to observe their surroundings and orient themselves to it. And like we always call that the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act. And then you observe what happens after you act. Then you observe, orient, decide, act again. And your OODA loop just keeps happening. You're constantly reacting. And what happens is sometimes if inputs are coming in or being shut off, either inputs are shut off because you're not looking up, or they're coming in too fast, your OODA loop breaks down and you freeze up, right? And that this happens to coxswains, it happens to athletes, it happens to Marines on a radio. You know.
Say what those oodles are again. Orient.
Observe.
Observe.
Yep. Orient. So you observe your situation, you orient yourself within it, you decide, and then you act. That OODA loop. And it's something like I always used to have my coxswains actually, like after I came back from like infantry school, I taught my coxswains that, and it was like, if you just tell me your OODA loop broke down, I get it. Like OODA loop broke down, I just need to like take a second, wait one, great, awesome. You know.
I'm stealing that.
Yeah, I like that. That's good.
Do it.
I think when you get back to the write-up stuff, where the write-up stuff helps is if you can get that into the hands of the coxswains ahead of time, or for example, typical thing, first thing you teach a novice coxswain is how to walk a boat out of the boathouse, or basically how to walk a boat to the water and put it on the dock. And if you can get that in their hands, they can hold that and watch another coxswain do it so that they can relate a little bit, that it isn't just like parroting the words, that the word, all your words should have meaning. But you're right, when you put that in their hands in the boat, then they're spending more time reading. But I do think there's value to having a script per se that you have time to go over and look at and examine and be like, wait, why do I say this? What's this for? And then taking that and comparing it to an experienced coxswain and going, oh, okay, like now I understand where that fits in. So I think, but right, you don't want it to be a crutch. Going back and forth, right? Like, okay. So.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask you about, I've sort of always thought that just like giving coxswains things to parrot has, for at least the first couple of days, helped them get comfortable in their own skin, kind of just like, okay, we're going to do this and it's going to work. And then we can sort of have a little bit more room to work. But do you ever think about coxswains sort of developing more of a style, or do you want people, like, do you work on that, or do you just sort of, you know, once they can execute the basics well enough, like good coxswains find themselves coming into it?
I think every coxswain has a little bit of their own style. Like you're going to have your coxswains that are a little bit more just reserved in general, and then your coxswains that are a little bit more out there. And maybe say some wacky things and you don't really know why, but it works for them. So I think the more you can kind of let them come into their own and do their own thing, it's totally fine. I don't think it's anything wrong. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think the time that it becomes wrong is if it's so far out there that if they were to say they're in your top 8 and then all of a sudden for some reason they were in your bottom 8, but they're so out in left field in their own world compared to what your other coxswains are doing, that when they get into that bottom 8's going to be lost and doesn't know what to do. So I think you want them to have their own flair, but at the same time still be such a united front on things that if it came down to like race day and you needed your bottom coxswain to go in your varsity 8, like, you know that you could put them in there and everything's going to be all right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it's a little bit of give.
Mm-hmm. Is that something like you talked about sort of early on, getting the coxswains to just sort of sit down in a circle and tell a story? Is that like, do you try and sort of maintain, I mean, you can't make them be friends, but just like sort of, you know, have like, well, I guess for Penn State, we're a club team. So we'd have like the men, you know, do circuits while the women erg, and then the coxswains will go do like a thing as a group. Is that something you would do at Bucknell to sort of keep that consistency, sort of a baseline level of just sort of consistency of style, just like make them know each other a little bit?
Yeah, I definitely think that like your coxswain unit needs to be a unit. I think if they aren't a unit, then it's actually just going to create like some rub and animosity into thinking that coaches are maybe playing favorites when choosing boats, even though you've laid it out clearly. They get into their own heads and think like, coach is picking them because coach always talks to them. Whereas if you talk to them as a unit, then you know that they all heard the same message and in that they're in a space where they can ask questions when you keep them together as one. Like some things that are a little bit of a rub here and there. So a way to try to mitigate it was that, for instance, for some of our training sessions this winter, we needed to split up our group into 2 separate groups. So what we tried to do was put like our senior coxswains, like junior and senior coxswains, with our freshman coxswains, kind of split that up evenly, so that then the younger coxswains were learning from our older coxswains, and then that group was split up pretty evenly. And then I would try to do my best to remember do the same exact thing with them, which is difficult to do in an erg room when sometimes you go a little bit away from the plan depending on your group. But also going back to when Becky was asking about, like, when I meet with them, like in the winter time, like I definitely make sure that we meet as a unit and we don't meet as individuals unless they ask for an individual meeting, because the winter can just be extra grueling for them and kind of miserable for them.
Do you have any, I don't know, what have you learned anything in your experience that can help with that?
I think actually something I got at Ithaca was from Beth, was that she played what she called erg games with us. And so, I've taken that with me. So during long steady state sessions, usually we'll give the coxswains a little bit of time to go work out on their own, just so that they have that in their day as well, because I think that's important for them. But then we'll sit together in the erg room and I'll say, I want you to pick one person, and I want you to come back to me when you think you know what they could be doing better. And then they'll come back to me and tell me, and then we'll all discuss all together. Maybe they could be doing something better. Maybe it's the result of something else. And then we think about ways that they can go and talk to them to help them fix whatever they're doing. And then I'll send that coxswain out to go try to help them. And then we'll reevaluate later on to see if any change has been made.
So you have just like, go find someone and let me know what you think they could be doing better? Yeah,
exactly. Like, oh yeah, tell me who you're gonna observe and what you're seeing that they're doing, and then how do you plan to talk to them to fix what they're doing or tweak.
Mm-hmm. That's good. I like that. Yeah, I guess from my perspective, winter season for coxswains is always a little rough, but I like that.
Keeps them engaged. Also, I let them DJ, so that also helps. They enjoy that. They find joy in that.
What's also nice about that, I always call that coxswain rounds, because it's like being a doctor in the hospital where you go rounds with them. But sometimes I highly recommend doing that for another reason, is the fact that sometimes I call it coaching blindness, where you've kind of given up on somebody's technique that you just can't seem to fix, and you just ignore it way more than you probably should be. But those coxswains, when you tell them to go pick some random person, they're going to go find that person, and they're going to remind you as a coach, like, oh, shit, I haven't been coaching that, have I?
That is true. So true.
Yeah, do you have, I guess I don't know if you can, to what extent you can answer, like, what have you learned between, like, with the programs you've been at, like, what do you think are relative strengths, just sort of making their situation work for them more generally? I don't know. That's like it's not a very well-defined question. Like, I don't know if I can rephrase it better. Like, what have you learned? Like, have you learned anything at Bucknell that you don't think you would have learned at Ithaca? And is there anything that you learned at Ithaca that you don't think you would have learned at Bucknell?
That's a tough question there, John.
Yeah, no, it's not. Feel free to punt on that, but
that's a tough question.
It's a really tough. Yeah, no, it is a really tough question.
And just remember, this is going out on this record that all coaches can listen to it. So be careful. La 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 la.
I think you can learn anything anywhere you are. I think you just have to be open to wanting to learn and wanting to grow. And so I think as long as you go into it with that growth mindset, that you're you're going to take away something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. That's good. Do you talk to your coxswains about that sort of growth mindset? Like even when things are going really poorly, like, oh, what did, that went horrible. Like, what did we learn?
Yeah, I definitely try to instill that with them, because I know for myself, it's really easy for me to get down on myself really quickly about things. And so since that's something I've been actively trying to get better at and changing, it's something that I would love to see them get better with sooner rather than later in life. So I try to instill that with them a lot. I even go back to, I don't know, I'm really big into like mantras. Like I just really enjoy them. I think that kind of stemmed from actually being at Cox and Ithaca. And so I usually try to have them, and even the athletes, like have something to go back to when they're starting to feel kind of like down on themselves. I'm like, what's your word? And then even when I'm with them and I see if like their body language is seeming a little bit off, I'm like, I'll like say their phrase to them or be like, what's your phrase? And then that usually kind of helps them and changes it a little bit.
Mm-hmm. I like that. Yeah, that's good.
Any other questions, comments, or anything?
No, I don't. I think that was like really informative for me. I don't know. I thought that was really good.
Is that what you're looking for, John? I kind of just like,
yeah, no.
My gut told me to do.
It was a vague question. I took a lot of notes.
She totally did not answer that question. She totally
I know.
answered it in the kindest way possible. But
that's fine.
Allison,
I'll stop recording.
Oh, that was like Allison's running for office and doesn't want to.
Yeah, that was.
So, Allison, I do want to talk a little bit. Oh, my dog. More about the storytelling thing.
Yeah.
I don't really know if this is how you do it, but when you were talking about it, I just got thinking about just right that aspect of tone.
Oh, rigor.
Mm. Oh, she's muted.
One of my friends has a friend who is desperately looking for a pull-up bar because she's CrossFit. And I have a pull-up bar that's been hanging in my house for 20 years with probably 3 pull-ups on it in 20 years. So I just left it out on my driveway and they just came and picked it up. But back to the storytelling, because I'm not really sure exactly how you do it, but it got me thinking about how great to select a couple different stories, maybe even children's stories, right? Where you just have them read, and I'm thinking Hansel and Gretel, where it's like spooky or scary, or you're thinking about a princess where they really have to, right, where they actually have to, very easy read, but then they have to change their voice and inflection because like, I've gone through reading stories to kids, and if you just read your story like this, but if there's this big giant bear, and I just, I don't know how you do it, but it got me thinking of some like really fun, great ideas. So.
I like that. That's really good.
I'm definitely doing that.
Me too.
Yeah, that was actually one of my ideas for going into this spring, because the first time I did storytelling was on one of our spring break training trips. So when you're in the middle of the woods somewhere in cabins, you don't really have access to like storybooks. Right. You're just limited to what you have. So that was kind of where I kind of got started with the idea of storytelling, because none of them were understanding. Like it didn't matter what I said to them. I was like, your tone of voice is like, I try to explain to them speeding up their tone of voice was causing everyone to rush terribly. And they're like, no, it's not. They're trying to fight me. So that's why I was like, okay, we're going to go to something super basic that doesn't even have anything to do with rowing. to get them to kind of change.
I even think in the winter, just like taking the winter, you could do some of that and you could actually record it and have them listen to themselves and then practice telling that story.
It's fine, Becky.
Telling that story and have like a pre-story and a post-story kind of a thing. Like that would be fun. The other thing I thought about while you were talking was, do you remember that making the instructions for the peanut butter and jelly sandwich that we did?
Oh yeah.
Like, and imagining that to, again, taking a boat out of the boathouse and putting it on the water.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna let you talk because my dog's barking.
Yeah, what's this peanut butter and jelly thing?
Yeah, so Becky and I both went to
It's a great exercise.
The coaches academy, and communication specialist there, Betsy Butterick. She has a lot of really great videos on YouTube. I highly recommend her stuff. But she and the peanut butter, what she does is she has you write out on an index card how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And so you're supposed to give her all the details of how to do it. And then she ends up making the peanut butter and jelly sandwich based off of the way that you instructed her to do it. And it's pretty funny, the different results you get, such as you'll get, like peanut butter like on your hands because someone never said to like put the sandwich together and enjoy it. So like you just end up with all sorts of kooky things.
How do you spell her name?
Betsy is Betsy, and then her last name Butterick is Butterick, I believe. Thanks, Becky.
So my memory of when we did it was it said, open the bag. And she basically just took the loaf of bread, grabbed the plastic in the middle and went, whoa. And the bread just went all over the place. But again, I think it goes back to that like awareness exercise of how many steps there really are to safely get a boat on and off the water. And each of those steps, there is a meaning to each of those, like the idea of hands-on, lift it an inch or slide it out, like all those things have value. And I'm gonna do that with my coxswains before I put them on the water because your talking got me connecting those two things together. And like the idea of like writing out the script, like with that whole conversation got me like back to, wow, that's just like backwards of the peanut butter and jelly, building the peanut butter and jelly sandwich exercise. Like it's the opposite, like the value of the specificity to all of these things that I've written down that I'm telling you are important to say. Anyway.
Yeah, that's such a good one, Becky. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. Yeah, I don't think I have any more questions. But anyone else have any? Kristen's been tuned in. But yeah, no, thanks a lot, Allison. I think that was I think that was just like super helpful for me personally. I hope everyone else got some benefit out of that.
Good.
That was awesome.
Yeah, and if any other questions pop up at all, like don't hesitate to reach out.
I have sort of a related question.
Yeah.
What do you think of, I don't know, I see like ads on Road 2K and stuff like coxswain camps. Like, do you have an opinion on those?
I don't really know enough about them, to be completely honest, to have an opinion about them, but I think that probably like high school coxswains might get more out of it than might get something out of it. I know that I've talked to a coxswain that's gone to like Mary Whipple's ninth seat and had a really good experience there. So I think it's just kind of up to them if they think it's worth it or not.
You know, I don't know very much about them, but if I had a coxswain who is interested, I would absolutely encourage him to go, because how often is the coxswain really the center of attention where they're the ones who are getting the coaching and the focus? And the people running those camps their goal is coaching of coxswains. And they just have to be spending more time on the coxswains than we ever can as coaches because of the athletes that we're dealing with. I'm a huge fan of coaching coxswains. I think it's really important, but I think a camp like that would be awesome. Course delivery, I mean, all that stuff makes a difference, but I just think I think they'd have a ball. I think it'd be great.
Yeah, John, if you remind me later, I had one of my old coxswains who was really good. Used to do quite a few of them, so I'll ask her which one she likes and send them over to you.
Yeah, I think I have one girl at State High who's like, I don't know, just like unbelievable natural coxswain. So I'm trying to push her to get better. Well, give her the option. Let her know what's out there at least. Yeah.
I also know that I have, I definitely also know like they started doing like those ODP camps for like high schoolers. And I think they require coxswains to submit a recording, but even trying to get her into one of those, I've had athletes that I've talked to that have been a part of that, and they said that it was an amazing experience, and they actually are still even getting things from the ODP camps.
ODP?
Yeah, Olympic Development Programs. And they got to like talk to Mary Whipple, and they even have occasionally still gotten to have some like reunion sessions with her, and access to things that were, they said were worthwhile.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I was looking at that. This was going to be our inaugural spring, but that didn't quite happen. So no recordings yet, but we'll get there. That's good. I'm not familiar with that, so I'll have to look into that. ODP program.
Yeah,
that's run by
U.S. Rowing.
Okay.
You're welcome, Connor. Have fun in class.
Thanks, Connor. Cool. I'm gonna stop recording.